Are you welcoming everybody? Or am I welcoming everybody?
Guess you are now.
That was funny because I totally took a drink with the name of the water bottle out. Like I'm sponsored or something, you know? We are not sponsored by, what is it, Smart Water? We're not sponsored by Smart Water. What? I don't understand. You want to know the amusing thing? Is that Rob is up in the sort of, I don't know, video booth, I think trying to tell me to move it along. But in the process of telling me to move it along, 100% distracted me. So we're so glad you're here this morning. We are going to worship together. Whether you are here, whether you are somewhere else, maybe you are watching from a campground. Wouldn't that be awesome? I'm going camping later today.
Nice.
So exciting. Or in bed. Maybe you're in bed right now. How exciting is that? Or maybe any number of other places. But let's get started. I forgot about the B minor. I forgot about the B minor.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Too many moving parts.
To the cries of a poor man, we've never done nothing. How could we be something? Every heart has an hour of existence. Every breath brings a chance for redemption. If somehow we could wake up, let us love like we were children. Make us feel like we're still in a world that knows it's burning to the ground. Give us time to breathe the system. Make us find what we've been missing. In a world that knows it's burning to the ground. In the crowd of the dead and disappointed, we're ashamed giving up on what we wanted. Take a chance on a long shot this time. Aren't we all just at least worth another try? I'm a king in the land of abuses, undermined by the promise of excuses. Who's to win if we know that it's not fair? Who's to fight when it seems that no one cares? If somehow we could wake up, let us love like we were children. Make us feel like we're still living in a world that knows it's burning to the ground. Give us time to beat the system. Make us find what we've been missing in a world I know it's burning to the ground. It's hard to stay here, but where do we go? I know we can't feel it anymore. It's true, the time is wearing us down. We fall further and further away, waiting for always to change. Let us love like we were children. Make us feel like we're still living in a world I know it's burning to the ground. Give us time to beat the system. Make us find what we've been missing in a world I know it's burning to the ground. Leave your hurting on the road behind you. Let the wind go with you till the morning comes. Yeah, your sorrow, it can't save you. It won't answer for what you've done.
Oh yeah, that was pretty. That was pretty. I like that. Oh my goodness, so much fun, so much fun. I'm really enjoying the conversation. It's very helpful. Oh, I gotta stop watching the Facebook feed at the same time. So, so Heather sent me this joke this week, and it says, I've got a joke for you from a friend. But I'm starting to feel like every person who sends me a joke from a friend, which I'm thinking is starting to be like the same thing as like when people come and talk to me and it's like, I've got a friend who's struggling with, and you're like, I think this might be Heather's joke. Anyways, I'm not sure it's a joke from a friend. I think maybe it's her joke. Anyways, so it says, did you know that flip-flops were invented by a French person? He was named Philippe Flop. Then it says, what I like even better is it says, P.S. If you didn't get the joke, say his name out loud several times. You're welcome. I think that was Heather's joke. I think me thinks she doth protest too much. Anyways, that was the joke for this week. It's a fabulous joke. You're never going to believe this, but I actually have an announcement today. I have an actual announcement. If that doesn't mean that things are starting to at least return, I was going to say return to normal, but we're nowhere near that because I'm trying to look at you through this weird flashy plexiglass thing. But it's exciting. We have an announcement about a thing that is happening in a couple of weeks here at Vox. So we are planning a little outdoor get-together in August for Vox on August the 8th. We are going to have a little bring-your-own picnic, kind of chairs, blankets, bring that kind of stuff into the Morgan's new backyard. We're going to have some music. They've got a nice deck where we can put a little bit of a sound system up, have a little bit of some live music. Maybe we'll even do some fun stuff and some worship, as if worship wasn't fun. We will maybe do some non-worship pub music. Maybe that might be kind of fun, as well as maybe have a little bit of time of worship in their backyard. It's pretty exciting because they moved during the pandemic, so a bunch of us haven't even had a chance to be at their new house yet. So that is exciting. So August 8th, after church, mark that on your calendars. We're going to have an actual thing that we do together officially outside of church. That is just so exciting to me. I'm so pumped about that reality. So mark that on your calendars. That should be pretty awesome. I think also we're probably going to be sending out some particulars, but next week we should have childcare available on Sunday mornings. So that's pretty exciting. We got a couple people who have volunteered-ish to help out with childcare on Sunday mornings. Some of the rest of you might get volunteered-ish as things progress. And voluntold a little wee bit. We're going to go back to the roots of Vox, when if you showed up 2 weeks in a row, you just got given a job. So we might just do that. And that'll be fun. But yeah, so we're going to have some childcare, so that's pretty cool for those of you who are watching online right now and struggle, because it is a little tricky. Usually, we love the chaos of the kids at Vox. I never care that they're running around and making noise and being distracting. It's a lot of fun, but it is tricky with COVID and stuff, because we're not really supposed to be letting people go run all around. So we need to make sure everybody stays put and doesn't run around on Sunday mornings. And if you would like to help, if you want to help, please talk to Hope or McKenna and let them know that you would love to help. Mostly McKenna. If you don't want to help, please just leave your phone number with me so I can just put you on a list. Anyways, so it should be should be pretty exciting. I'm pretty pumped about that. So that's exciting. We have announcement and childcare. Oh my goodness, it's. I was gonna say it's almost like normal, but no coffee yet. Soon we'll be allowed to have coffee again. Won't that be exciting? All right, marvelous. Birthdays. Do we have any birthdays? I wasn't paying attention. I was trying to ignore what was going on in the comment section for a little bit. I don't see any birthdays. No birthdays. It's always so weird when we don't have birthdays. Marvelous.
What do we do now?
What do we do now? Happy birthday to some people who had birthdays. All right, so what's going to happen now is, because nobody birthday in a couple seconds, we're going to do something a little different today. Heather's going to be speaking. We're going to kind of do that now, because we're going to move into something kind of different after Heather is done speaking to us this morning. So we're going to try to clear a space. Yeah, just move it to the side. Yeah.
won't get breathed on by me. Good morning, everybody. It's so exciting still to come out here and there are like people, especially when I got put up onto the stage before most of you arrived, because this is Vox and that's how we roll. It's so good to see you. So this morning, I want to start by asking, anybody feeling like it's hard to get back into relationships after COVID? Anybody? Anybody feeling this? Like in the first few days and weeks after COVID hit, we were absolutely desperate, weren't we? For all of our social structures and all of our ways of connecting with people. But as time has gone on, we've kind of gotten awfully comfy at home, some of us, and some of us awfully happy just, binge watching Netflix and have more or less convinced ourselves that we're perfectly okay on our own, right? And it's not like it's just a COVID issue, right? Like, there are so many things that can make relationships tricky for us to navigate and hard for us to keep showing up for. Like, we move, or we get married, or we start a new job, or we have kids, or somebody says the wrong thing, or we get busy, or someone starts to struggle maybe with mental health issues, or someone reveals something about themselves that we don't know how to handle. Or maybe, something happens to a relationship between two people that we were both friends with, and now we don't know, like, do we go with that person and do we go with that person, or are we allowed to talk to either of them? It just gets hard, right? Because relationships are hard. And I feel this the same as the next person. We had Tim and Rhonda over for breakfast a few weeks back, and Tim mentioned a show called Restoration House that he had been watching, and I found it on Amazon Prime, and I basically binge watched it for the week straight once I handed in my last paper, because I was tired and I was worn out, and I had written so many words, and like I think over 100,000 of them in just 5 weeks. It was ridiculous. And it just felt like too much to reach out to a friend or make plans for a coffee date or whatever. And maybe you're better about the Netflix binge watching than I am, but perhaps for you it's about how much is on your plate at work, or it's about the fact that at home you can keep your jammies on, or it's that you're more of an introvert, or it's because you've been burnt way too many times. All that is fair. But sometimes things pause in life long enough that you realize that there is a person or a relationship that you miss. Like maybe you're sitting having a drink at the end of the day and you remember someone who really mattered to you. And you look back and you realize that it's not just how many weeks it's been or how many months it's been, but now it's how many years it's been since you've seen them. And it can be hard to know where to start. I know because I faced that recently. The friend I hadn't seen in about 5 years, and I realized it had been 5 years, and I thought, this has gone on too long. Well, what do I do? Maybe you still don't know how you'll get over that thing that was there back then. Maybe that thing that made you drift apart or suddenly dropped a bombshell on you or left you feeling like you had to cut and run. Sometimes we're dealing with those things in our relationships with each other, but it's probably worth mentioning sometimes we're dealing with those in our relationships with God too, right? And this isn't a new problem either. We've been looking at the Old Testament this summer, and this idea of broken relationships is actually pretty common in the pages of the Bible. One of the worst offenders for this is King David. So, the story of King David starts in 1 Samuel, before David becomes king. We first hear about David when he's still a boy, working as a shepherd for his father. And he has 7 older brothers. And when God sends the prophet Samuel to his father's house to anoint someone with oil to become king, he's so far down the pecking order that no one even bothers to call him out for the meeting. Right? Have you ever noticed that? Like, it's not until Samuel has determined that God doesn't want any of the other brothers to be anointed that they finally even mention David's name. And he gets called, and little David gets anointed by Samuel to be the next king of Israel. And it's this David that kills Goliath with a stone and a slingshot, and this David who goes into battle and elicits songs about how many enemies he has killed. He's the one people talk about being a man after God's own heart. But when it comes to his relationships, I honestly get a little bit confused about this, because David's really not good at relationships. Like, David's the king who stays home from battle, which he was never supposed to do, and instead one day sitting around in the palace bored, sees a lovely lady bathing on a roof and commands her to have sex with him, even though she is the wife of one of his soldiers. And then, when he can't plant the resulting pregnancy on her husband, and trust me, he tries, arranges with one of his commanders to have him murdered during the battle. This King David. In fact, this King David has issues with his brothers, with his wives, with his sons, basically everyone around him. The only person David doesn't seem to have issues with, in fact, is the one who is called his best friend. And that's a bit weird, really, because his best friend was the son of King Saul, the man who was king before David. King Saul was the very first king that the Israelites had ever had. But for various reasons, he didn't seem to quite cut it. And so God sent his prophet Samuel to anoint David, not Saul's son, Jonathan, to be king after Saul. Now, eventually Saul finds out that David's going to be king after him, and that's fine. He's okay with that, right? And at first, he decides that he's so fine with it that he's going to use David to lead his armies into battle, in the hopes that maybe some of them might end up killing him. But that doesn't work. He ends up being lauded by all the people. Everyone's thrilled about David and thinks David's so much better than Saul. So Saul's next tactic is to have him come and eat at his table and play the harp for him. And it's here that David and Jonathan meet. Here that their friendship deepens deeply. And that's all great, except eventually Saul starts throwing spears at David, and David realizes he's going to have to leave. And it's at this moment that David and Jonathan make a covenant to one another. So, to understand that last sentence, it turns out we need to understand what a covenant is. I tried asking a few people this week, and I got some very vague answers about this. So, I have rewritten this section more than any other part of the sermon this week. Let's see whether we can get this idea across. You can tell me afterwards. So the very most basic idea is that a covenant is an agreement. That's the answer you'll get if you look up covenant on Google. It says that a covenant is an agreement. And the idea of an agreement suggests there are two or more people involved in making that covenant, right? To have an agreement, you have to have another person. But it's bigger than that. So the most common party to something that is called a covenant in the Bible is a number of incidents when God is said to have made a covenant with an individual or with a nation or even with the entire planet. And in almost every single one of these cases, the person or people or ecosystem that God is making this covenant with, someone speaks up and says, God, show us that this is actually going to happen. you need to give us a sign. We need some proof here. And so God gives them a sign. And that sign is a way of remembering. And the Bible tells us that when God makes a covenant, God is faithful to it. It's a promise that is trustworthy, a promise we can expect will be fulfilled with loving kindness, no matter what life throws at it. So covenant relationships, they're a really big deal. And even though we're not that great at being faithful or trustworthy or filled with loving kindness, sometimes as humans try to make covenant relationships with each other as well, right? This is what happens when people get married. We've had a bunch of pretty big wedding anniversaries in our church this year. Janelle and Carol Ann celebrated 30 years. I'm pretty sure Nathan and Carrie are celebrating 25 years next month. And a little birdie told me that Neil and Joanne are celebrating a whopping 50 years next month. That's pretty fantastic. We will have to sing happy anniversary to them when the time comes around. And most of us will know, and the one couple sitting here who is getting married in a couple weeks needs to remember that marriage is not easy. Anybody want to disagree with me? Anyone in the room who's been married want to tell me that marriage is easy? No takers? No takers? I am not Nathan, so I do not watch the live stream while I'm preaching, so if you guys are having a different conversation, that's between you. But I don't know anyone who actually thinks marriage is easy. As I said, not easy. Those of us who've been married for a long time can think of lots of things that have happened over the years that made our particular marriage stories difficult or challenging or even inconceivable. And we're human, so of course we don't always manage to follow through, but I think that makes it that much more incredible when the covenant we make with each other allows us to show up to the table and do the work to get through the hardest things in life, don't you? Or for those of us who have kids, we could think about our relationship with those kids. I worked as a doula for about 10 years, and it was not uncommon to see a parent hold their child in front of them for the very first time and make these very quiet statements to their child that are basically a covenant or promise. They say something like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to be here for you no matter what happens. And I'm going to do everything I can to look after you and make sure you have everything you need. Right? And then life happens. And they take that tiny, cute, crinkly, couldn't do anything wrong 3-minute-old baby home from the hospital. And it screams all night long for weeks or months or years. That was in the sermon. I wrote that down. And yet somehow, we don't throttle them. Somehow, we don't throttle them and throw them packing. Somehow that promise, that covenant sticks, even when they decide to get a frickin' puppy. Or when they decide that they're teenagers and they're going to refuse to clean their room. Or they're going to refuse to take a shower. Or they're going to refuse to get out of the shower. Or they're going to refuse to come home at a reasonable time. Or they're going to refuse to ever leave the house. And it doesn't really matter. Whatever it is this particular teenager happens to do or not do or announce or not announce about themselves that drives you up the wall, yet somehow, most of us keep feeding them, keep making sure they have clothes, keep learning whatever it is they need us to learn for them. Somehow we keep showing up. Because, why? Because somehow we stick to that covenant we made when they were crinkly and new and we didn't know any better. And all of these are covenant relationships, even though we mostly don't call them that. And when biblical scholars and theologians look at this covenant word, they define it with ideas like kindness and righteousness and constancy, devotion, goodness, and abundance in love. And so this is the kind of promise I'm talking about when I tell you that David and Jonathan made a covenant with each other. And that's going to be important in a little bit. So, there is no mention that David and Jonathan ever saw each other after that day. Something about Jonathan's father having a death wish for David made it difficult for them to get together and have drinks on the town, or hang out with each other, or hang out with each other's families for long lingering meals, or get to bounce each other's kids on their knees. And in the end, Jonathan, two of his brothers, and King Saul all end up dying on the same day as each other in the middle of a battle. And that's recorded at the end of 1 Samuel. But the covenant was made all the same. And the covenant remained despite their separation from one another over the years. But like lots of our covenants, that doesn't mean that this covenant between David and Jonathan was like top of David's mind all the time, right? Even though David had been anointed to be king after Saul, and even though he was no longer stuck in hiding for fear of his life, David still had a lot going on in the years to come. Like, Jonathan had one more brother who lived for another 7 years and held power over most of Israel while he lived, and that caused some headaches and hassles for David, to be honest. And even after that, David found himself consolidating his power and fighting off other tribes and widening his borders and generally establishing himself as king. But eventually, maybe 15, 20 years down the road, eventually things are calm enough that David has time to sit around and reminisce. And it's then that we read that he remembers his covenant with Jonathan and with Jonathan's descendants. And so in 2 Samuel 9, we read that David goes looking for someone in Saul's family who he can show kindness to. Now, if we're reading along, this kindness word couldn't trip us up a bit, because today kind can seem like a bit of sort of a weak idea, right? So it's really important for us to notice that the word that is translated kindness is the Hebrew word hesed. And I am not saying that right. I have been very strongly told off for it, but I can't say it any better. This Hebrew word hesed. And like a lot of the words in the Bible, even though kindness is not an inaccurate translation, it's not the most accurate. The most accurate translation would be covenantal faithfulness. And so now we're back to this covenant idea again, right? Which means that this kindness that David wants to offer to Mephibosheth is a robust, constant, devoted, steadfast love and faithfulness. That's the idea he has in his head when he calls on his servants to find a descendant of Saul. At least, that's the plan. But there's a couple of problems. Because there's something that David doesn't know yet about Mephibosheth, and there's something we don't know yet either. So you remember how I mentioned at the beginning that David isn't really very good at his relationships? It turns out one of the issues that he takes things really personally, and he holds a grudge for sometimes quite considerable lengths of time. For example, in 2 Samuel 5, 6-7, we read that the king David and his men marched to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, "You will not come in here. Even the blind and the lame will turn you back," thinking, "David cannot come in here." Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, which is now the city of David. So it would seem that the Jebusites used blind and lame men, probably soldiers who had previously been injured in battle, to taunt and insult him, or perhaps even, as one scholar writes, as a moral barrier against David and his troops. Although it didn't seem to be enough to win the fight in this case. And honestly, you would think that having won against the Jebusites, David would have, expended all of his anger and frustration about the subject. But we read in verse 8 that David had said on that day, "Whoever would strike down the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, those whom David hates. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house." It's easier for this kind of thing to happen than we might like to believe. Whether it's people with disabilities or those experiencing homelessness, or those whose skin or belief systems are different from ours, or those whose gender or sexuality is outside of what we thought was right, it's so easy to respond with hatred and with walls and with barriers, with avoidance and policies that would keep people out and protect us from what is uncomfortable in front of us. And that's what happens with David. It turns out that this declaration by David significantly extends the legal and religious restrictions for the Israelites around those with disabilities. See, back in the book of Leviticus, when God was telling the people what they could and couldn't do, he said that if you were part of the Levite tribe, that was supposed to provide the priests to the temple, and if you had certain disabilities, then you weren't allowed to serve as a priest in certain ways. But that was it. That was the only restriction. You were still allowed to eat the sacrifices that were set aside for the Levites, to participate in the table fellowship of the priests, and that required that they be able to go into the what was then the tabernacle, what would later be called the temple, because you had to eat those sacrifices in the tabernacle. So they were allowed in. But it turns out David's words extend these restrictions to the point where those with disabilities can't even enter God's house, much less offer the sacrifices needed to find forgiveness for their sins. God didn't set up that rule. That's not what he said. That's not what God was after. But it's what happened. And it's what happened because of David's fear and David's discomfort and David's anger about his experience with those with disabilities. David makes a statement that makes it imminently harder for people with disabilities to connect with God. A statement that would make it harder for them for years, for centuries to come. This is what our fear of others does. And it can be one of the biggest barriers to relationship that can possibly go up between us. And this seemingly disconnected story that takes place 4 chapters before our story is going to fit into what I'm talking about this morning, I promise. Because David asks his advisors if there's anyone in Saul's family who he could show covenantal kindness to. And his advisors talk amongst themselves, and someone remembers that one of Saul's servants, a man named Ziba, is still alive. So they call Ziba before David. David asks Ziba the same question, and Ziba tells David about this guy named Mephibosheth. And if you're reading through the book of 2 Samuel and you got to this current story, you might remember, tucked away in 2 Samuel 4, there was one single verse, and it said this: Saul's son Jonathan had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, and in her haste to flee, it happened that he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Now, it's been maybe as many as 15 to 20 years since this fall happened. We don't know if Mephibosheth broke his legs and they just didn't set right, whether he shattered his pelvis and it never healed properly. We don't even know if he had a brain injury because of it. We do know that he becomes lame, which is loosely defined as being unable or imperfectly able to walk. That's all we got. He's lame, I'm lame, there you go. He's lame. And we know that he goes with his nurse to a place called Lodabar, which is a place of hiding. And we know that by the time of our story today, enough time has passed that Mephibosheth now himself has a wife and a son. And I think it's interesting that by the time Ziba comes to answer David's question about whether there are any descendants of Saul left, he seems to know about David's declaration that there should be no blind or lame in the house, because Ziba makes it clear in his answer that Mephibosheth is lame in both feet. Maybe it's to protect himself. He does seem to be a bit of a self-protective guy, this Ziba, we find out later on. Or maybe it's to protect Mephibosheth. Less sure of that. I'm not sure. But Ziba wants to make it clear that Mephibosheth is one of those others that David has said so succinctly that he hates. So what happens next? Well, given what we've learned, the most logical thing to expect is that David would throw a fit and send Ziba flying. It would not be the only time that happened. At best, we might hope that David would command his servants to send Mephibosheth some money or give him back a portion of land and be done with him. But the covenantal relationship we were talking about earlier can be a powerful relationship. In this case, the covenant promised to his friend Jonathan is enough to overcome David's fear of at least this one particular lame individual. And Mephibosheth is sent for and brought to David. And it says in 2 Samuel 9, starting at verse 6, Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and did obeisance. David said, Mephibosheth. He answered, I am your servant. I don't think he was too convinced at this point. David said to him, do not be afraid, for I will show you kindness. Remember, this is that covenantal kindness we were talking about earlier. I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you yourself shall always eat at my table. In the face of the restrictions he set out just a few chapters earlier that would prevent the lame and the blind from even coming near to God in God's temple or David in his house, David's covenant relationship allows him to overcome his fear and respond with provision to Mephibosheth and his family. And what's really surprising is just how much this covenant relationship allows for David to offer. He could have simply restored Mephibosheth's lands or restored his lands and given him the manpower to tend his herds. He does all of this, but he also ensures that along with that, Mephibosheth gets a seat at the table. And this goes beyond just providing for Mephibosheth's needs. See, in the ancient world, when you extended hospitality to someone, then you simultaneously offered them protection. And interestingly enough, you didn't just offer them protection from you personally. Instead, when a household in a community offered protection to someone, then the entire community had to protect the person as well. So by inviting Mephibosheth to eat at David's table, David is offering protection to Mephibosheth from himself, but also from all of Israel. Up to this point, as the grandson of Saul, there were many zealous men of King David who would have been thrilled to prove themselves loyal by killing Mephibosheth, as is seen in the deaths of some of Saul's other descendants. But with this invitation, Mephibosheth can come out of hiding in the wilderness for the first time in his life. With this invitation, his life is legitimized and protected. But he gets more than that. As someone with a seat at David's table, Mephibosheth is eating with the king's sons. The king's table in David's day was far more than a place of provision and protection. It was also a place of purpose. It was simultaneously table and cabinet room of the federal government rolled into one. Here, the issues of the day were discussed, the opinions of his sons were considered, and here, like one of the king's sons, now sits Mephibosheth. So the relationship David had with Jonathan was enough to get him over his fear of someone he was scared of, which is really powerful. But the decision to eat with each other becomes in itself a new covenantal act. And so it's not just a one-way covenant anymore from David to Mephibosheth. See, once they start eating together, what was a one-off covenant made at a single specific time in history becomes a new covenant that is now formed and reformed, reinforced and built up time and again over a meal. See, meals have this enormous amount of possibility, in fact, when it comes to the ways in which they help us build covenant. In the Middle East, even today, when you eat with another person, you make and remake a covenant of faithfulness with them. You bind yourself with that other person, and there are all sorts of social rules that dictate what you can and can't do to harm another person once you've eaten with them. And in fact, what you must do to be faithful to them when you've eaten with one another. So when David starts eating with Mephibosheth, it creates a new mutual covenant between David and Mephibosheth. And that has ramifications for both of them later on in 2 Samuel. But it's not just David and Mephibosheth who benefit from a covenant relationship. Jesus seems to think it matters as well. In fact, on the night when he was crucified, on the night before he was crucified, when Jesus wants to make a new covenant with humanity, what does he say? He says, "This cup is the new covenant." Jesus institutes a new covenant not with a hockey game or a policy document or a war or a musical, but with a meal. And then Jesus tells those who follow him to use this meal to remember him by. The thing is, the people who follow Jesus are often really different from one another, aren't they? Now, this isn't suddenly a new thing in our day and age. It was true around that very first table when Jesus passed around the bread and the wine that very first time. Seated around that table were people from every political party, religious sect, social class, even gender. Because although we have lots of paintings of Jesus and his disciples, we know that there were women who also followed Jesus around. They funded his ministry. They likely cooked for him and his disciples. They washed clothes for Jesus and his disciples. But they also sat around the table with him and listened to his teaching. So this table, this meal, this new covenant was more than just a covenant between each of them individually and God. Since the very earliest days of the church, we have known that it was also a communal covenant between all of these very different individuals that was meant to help form them collectively into the body of Christ. Now, I know this is going to surprise you, but it turns out it can be really uncomfortable trying to eat a meal together with people who are wildly different from you. Shock. Shock, I know. We talk about the church in Acts and how they ate together and held everything they owned in common, and it sounds fantastic and a fantasy all at once. But within a few years, normalcy has broken out again, and Paul is talking to the believers in Corinth about the way they're taking communion, and there are some problems. because this remembering, this pulling us back together, this refocusing us back on our covenant with God and with each other, it can't happen if we don't eat with each other. And in the case of the church in Corinth, that's not really what was happening. You see, it would seem that the rich folks had their own table in the central atrium of the house where they were eating their fancy meals and having their fancy dinner parties. And meanwhile, the poor folks, the disabled, the widows, the elderly, the slaves, the others that made them feel uncomfortable had the leftovers and the crumbs in a side hallway of the house. And Paul gets really upset about this. He says this behavior is unworthy of what the followers of Jesus are supposed to be remembering when they take communion. Paul gets that there are all sorts of power structures and divisions in the society of their time, all sorts of layers of difference that would easily separate groups of people from one another. But he says if there is one place that should be different, it should be at the communion table. Because the communion table is the place for our covenantal relationships with God and each other to be remembered and made new. So we've been thinking about covenants this morning. And as we get ready to take communion today, I would invite you to remember that this new covenant that we remember with communion is God's steadfast covenant and commitment to you. That when Jesus invited us to come together and take communion, it was to remember the creation of the new covenant between God and humanity. And that this covenant that Jesus' death and resurrection offers us crosses whatever divisions and differences you think exist between you and God. That absolutely no matter what you've done or who you are, this covenant is an invitation from Jesus. And it's sitting there waiting for you. This is the point of why we do what we do here at Vox. Because we know that this new covenant changes everything between us and God. And we want to see this covenant transform us more and more into the people Jesus would be if Jesus were us. But it doesn't just change everything between us and God. This new covenant is not just about a personal relationship with Jesus. It also changes everything between us and each other. So I invite you to look around. It's been a really long time since we've eaten this meal with each other. The process of eating together, whether it's communion or our rule of three, whether it's David and Mephibosheth or us today, it's all about renewing this covenant of faithfulness with one another. Now, these are the new COVID communion things. And if you don't have one, they were put out on most of the chairs, but there are some extra ones right up at the front that you can grab if you need be. And they're a little bit complicated. You take the top set off, and that gets you the bread. This is the bread. And then you take the bottom sticker off, and that gets you the wine. We're going to pretend this is the wine. And as Carol Ann pointed out, these little communion shooters are more of a metaphor of a meal than a meal itself. And I think she has a point. But still, I invite you to look around and as you take communion and remember that as members of the new covenant, we have a covenant with each other as well as with Jesus. As the body of Christ, we are covenanted to one another as well as to Christ. And those covenants are meant to help us get through all of the various ways in which we are different from one another. This is why we have our rule of three. It's to practice and live into this covenant in bigger ways than just a metaphor meal. So now that we're in step 3, I can encourage you as well to reach out and start having meals together with one another again. And not just with the people who are in this room. I encourage you to look out for who is missing from this table, who might be having an extra hard time getting back into the swing of relationships, and find a way to have a meal with them as well. I want to invite you and encourage you to do the work of remembering and reforming those covenants of faithfulness with one another, over beer and pizza on the front porch, coffee and donuts at an outside patio, backyard barbecues, and picnics by the beach. I want to encourage you to come out to this picnic we're going to have on August the 8th. Because this communion meal is more than just a bite of bread and a sip of juice. I'm going to invite the worship team to come on up. They're going to play for us. And I'm going to encourage you to join us as we do this. Paul tells us that on the night that he was betrayed, he took the bread, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat. This is the body of Christ broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And a little while later, after supper, he took the cup of wine and he gave thanks and said, "This is the cup of the new covenant, which is shed for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Whenever you drink it, remember me." Let's pray. Covenant God of faithful, committed love, from where we sit, it can so often feel like there is an enormous chasm of difference between us and you and between us and each other. We look at it sometimes and it can just feel too big to cross. But as we come back together today, 17 months after we last took communion together, I pray that we would be reminded of your promise to us in your death and your resurrection. I pray that we would remember that your love extends to us, whoever we are. May we taste and see that you are good. And I pray that we would remember that your love extends through us to each other, even as you remind us to reach out and eat together again. In Jesus' name, amen.
What can wash away my sin? What can make me whole again? What can make me white as snow? Nothing but your royal blood. What can heal the heart of stone? What resurrect these bones? There's no other fount I know. Nothing but your royal blood. Nothing but your royal blood. Your blood will never lose its power. Your blood will never lose. Your victory will stand forever. Your blood will never
serious technical difficulties.
Oh no.
I have like no monitor mix at all.
Oh no.
Yeah, I think I'm muted or something. All right. Oh yeah, I know, but I can't hear.
Oh.
I can't hear anything. Oh well. I'll just, I'll do it by feel.
Okay.
It's weird, did my guitar disappear? Is that what happened?
I can hear it here.
No, it's fine. It's a downside to using it in your monitor is that when it disappears, it's gone completely. Oh well, we'll figure something out. Can you just turn my monitor mix full up?
a fire consuming all for your Son's holy name. Let our hearts burn with the flame, a fire consuming all for your Son's holy name. Let our hearts burn with the flame, a fire consuming all for your Son's holy name. Oh, in the heavens we proclaim, you are King. We love you, Lord. We worship you. You are our God. You alone are good. You ask your Son to carry it. The heavy to honor this, the love of Christ, the Savior King. Come out of sadness from wherever you have been. Come broken hearted, let rescue begin. Come find your mercy, oh sinner, come near. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. hope for the hopeless and all those who strayed. Come sit at the table, come taste the grace. There's rest for the weary, rest that is yours. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can cure. Lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. There's joy for the morning, oh sinner, be still. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All of your cares, lift up the praise. Come as you are.
I really enjoy that song. I was lying on the floor up in the booth listening to Heather speak, and I was thinking about how sad it is, this idea of the fear of the other. I was thinking about how sad it is that so many of us miss out on these incredible opportunities to connect, to know people, to grow, to build relationships because we're so terrified of the other. And I think it's so sad that the church has almost developed this system of obstacles, this system of doors, this system of gates, this system of keeping people away and locked out and blocked out and saying, you aren't welcome, you aren't welcome, you aren't welcome. And I think, first off, it's just wrong. First off, that's not the heart of Jesus. Secondly, we're missing out on all of the voices at the table. We're missing out on all of these people who could be a part of what we are trying to do, a part of this family, a part of what it means to follow Jesus. And I think it's just so sad. And that's why I love this idea. Look, come as you are. Lay down your burdens and shame. You're broken. Doesn't matter. Lift up your face. It's all. Come here. Come be in this place. Come see who Jesus is. Come see what it means to try to chase after him. What an amazing thing to be able to say to the world around us. No, it's all right. You're welcome here. You're welcome here. You're welcome here. How beautiful is that? To set out a table and say, come, join me, eat something. Let me be part of this. I absolutely love, Heather, that idea of that renewed, that rewritten, that new covenant just happening over and over in our relationships. And as we took communion again today, renewed, rewritten. I love that idea a lot. So come as you are. One of the things that I'm excited about having everybody back again is that Vox has never been about the show, clearly. Clearly, Vox has never been about the show. But it's been tough because what we are about has been difficult. What we are about has been sort of shut down in the pandemic. To be together, to drink and eat together, to laugh, to joke, to sing, to harass, to be Rob. I really love that now at least Rob is locked up in that room up there. I mean, it's... You know what I mean? Like, so all of that has been shut down, and I am so excited that this come as you are is what we're stepping back into again, and I can't wait when I can see all your faces, and I don't have to worry about the mask. I can't wait until we can. Some of you will not come back in for worship until we drag you because you're out there talking, having coffee. I can't wait until we're sitting in each other's driveways. We have new neighbors. I can't wait until we throw a house party and terrify all the new neighbors on our street. I'm so excited for that because that's what this is about. This covenant relationship. That's what it's about, and that's what Vox is. It's who we are, not this. This is a substitute for now, and I'm so excited to at least be moving in that right direction. And so I just want to throw my voice behind what Heather was saying. It's going to take practice. It's going to take practice for us to learn how to do relationship and community again. So start practicing, stretch those community relational muscles this week. Invite somebody over for dinner, for a chance just to hang out in the backyard or whatever it is. But start stretching those community muscles just a little bit this week, and we'll see what God has in store for this community as we sort of move into yet again a new chapter in the Vox life. So God bless. We're so glad that you guys could be here this morning in person. We're glad that you could join us online, and we can't wait to be able to worship again with you and to wrestle a little bit with, I think, Psalm 63 next week. Looking forward to that. So God bless. We'll see you next Sunday. Same bad time, same bad channel.